Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we're going to be going over the best indie horror games that I have played this year. Let's get into the list. Varney Lake is actually one of my favorite games this year. It's a vampire story that is set in a small town near a lake, and half of the story takes place in the 1950s, the other half takes place in the 1980s. This is actually the second game in a trilogy, which I didn't know about at the time. It is a visual novel. It looks really cool. I like the story an awful lot. And it kind of set me on a path this year of playing other sort of horror-themed visual novels, so you might see more of these on the list. Playing Varney Lake reminded me of a lot of the summer vacations I went on, where you would go off to some small town near a lake, or something else would take place near a lake, and you just sort of have to create your own fun. That's sort of what happens here. You have this whole horror story where three kids are just trying to have a good time during their summer, and all of a sudden vampires come into play. And it's a surprisingly fun and somewhat wholesome story, even though it is still a horror game. Mothman 66 takes place, unsurprisingly, in 1966, and the story revolves around four people, essentially. They're going to watch a meteor shower, and all of a sudden this kind of crazy stuff happens. It's tied into a lot of folklore involving the Men in Black, aliens, also the Mothman. It's kind of a fun story. It takes a somewhat unique direction with it, and it set off a trilogy of games that includes Varney Lake and also Boston Knights. This is the first game in that trilogy. It isn't necessary for you to play all three of them to know what's going on, but it kind of helps if you play Mothman 1966 first, just because it explains a few things. I do like this one a lot just because of how creepy and kind of fun it is, but I do prefer Varney Lake over this one. Killer Frequency is a fantastic adventure game that reminds me of a lot of 1980s horror films. It takes place in a small town, and there's this sort of mysterious killer that has been around in this town for a while. It's one of like the local legends. And also, the town has sort of a strange past as well. There's a little bit of I Know What You Did Last Summer in it, and also Scream as well. You play as a radio DJ who is coming from a bigger town to a smaller one. And yeah, it's pretty great. I like it an awful lot. I just love the setting of this game, and I love that, there's not really a whole lot that you need to do. You just explore this radio station and use the clues in it in order to solve a bunch of puzzles. It's pretty great. A Night on the Farm is one of those games where I wonder why everything that's happening is the protagonist's problem. Was there no one else who could handle this situation or knew what was going on? It just feels very odd to me. So you crash your car, and you end up walking to a farm to get help. Seems obvious enough. Go to the place that looks like it's inhabited and ask for help. Well, it turns out that this is just a front for an underground facility where some weird shit is happening. It's honestly pretty cool. You encounter this entity that looks an awful lot like the Mothman. No idea why this has become a thing in indie horror games, but you're dealing with something that's like the Mothman. It's pretty cool to go through this and sort of unravel the weird mystery that's going on this farm. It's a trippy game, but it is a lot of fun. And it kind of looks like a lost PS1 game. Faith the Unholy Trilogy is a trilogy of adventure horror games. It tells a fun and creepy story that involves like satanic cults and that sort of thing. It's pretty awesome. Its visual style looks like either an Atari 2600 game or a computer game from the early 80s. I like that. I think it's kind of fun that they went with this art style, and it looks pretty good for what it is. Once it goes to the cutscenes, then it looks really awesome. The 3 games follow 2 characters, and they investigate demonic possessions and satanic cults. It feels, at least to me, like it was inspired by some of the horror movies in the late 70s, and also the Satanic Panic in the 1980s. I really like that they brought that stuff in, and it's really cool that it's all here. The gameplay is okay. It reminds me of a Sierra Online adventure game, but also sort of the LucasArts games as well. Now let's move on to something weird. Fork Road is a strange adventure horror game. It consists of a series of questions. Usually there are 2 answers, and once you go through it, you get some clues on how to actually solve things. You'll have to deal with some puzzles. If you don't get the puzzle right, something will happen to your character that'll cause you to restart the level. It's odd. It's very odd. So I like it, but it's also one of those games where I'm like, why do I keep answering the question correctly but end up getting beaten to death by a guy with a pumpkin on his head? Terminus is a really fun indie survival horror game. I like the retro-inspired graphics. It reminds me a little bit of XCOM UFO Defense. Also, being turn-based kind of ratchets up the tension a little bit. And also, when night falls and you literally can't see one square in front of your character, that's really cool. The combat's fair enough. It's all right. The whole idea behind the game is pretty cool. You're just trying to get to the safe haven, but you also have the option to create your own like little base and find more survivors and then lead like a whole group of people there. That also affects your score as well once you beat the game. In some ways, this feels like like a retro style 7 Days to Die in some ways. I really like it a lot. It's a really fun game, and yeah, it's been really cool to mess around with. This was kind of a creepy game to play through. You're just a regular guy in Still Wakes the Deep, and you're working on an oil rig. You're surprisingly capable, as you can climb, jump, and maneuver through most obstacles as long as you're fast enough. It's a very interesting game. The story is really great. I really like the story an awful lot. You're just dealing with a whole bunch of average problems at the very beginning, and then shit goes sideways once you hit something. And it feels an awful lot like a Lovecraft game. You're out in the middle of the ocean, there's no way to get off of it, and all of a sudden just some weird shit starts happening. The developers described it as The Thing on an oil rig, and yeah, I think that's right. It's kind of like the movie The Thing, or at least the John Carpenter remake of it. I still think it's more of a Lovecraft game. That's just me. I think of it like that instead of thinking of it as an 80s remake of a 1950s horror movie. So this game, and also the movie that I saw that was based on it, they're really awesome. It's set in Taiwan during the White Terror, which was a period in the island's history where the government was incredibly repressive. It's a really fun game. You can just feel how crazy everything is. The ending is really cool, and I don't want to spoil it for you, but it's just a really fun game. It follows 2 characters who find themselves trapped in a deserted school. There are monsters that are roaming the halls, there's a typhoon that's about to hit the island, and there's also this really kind of eerie thing that feels a little bit like Silent Hill, where you'll switch from the real world into kind of like a nightmare world. It's pretty great, and it ties into the ending as well. It's a really fun story about accepting responsibility for your actions and also getting forgiveness as well. It's a very, very good story. I liked it an awful lot, and the gameplay is really solid. It feels a little bit like a point-and-click adventure game, and it's just a lot of fun to play. Scarlet Hollow is one of the best indie games that I've played. It's an amazing horror game, and it's a really fun horror visual novel. It's an episodic game, so you can play through the first 4 episodes. There are a few more that are planned as well, so this game is still technically early access, but they're still working on it. It's a really great story. It takes place in an old mining town. You're the outsider and kind of the fish out of water. You come to the town and you just start encountering all this weird shit that's going on. You learn a lot about your family's history. There's a lot of history tied up in this little mining town that happens to be a company town, which I'm fascinated by the fact that it would still exist in modern times. It's a very weird idea, but it's really cool and it's done very well. Each episode deals with a different cryptid, and yeah, it's kind of cool to see how these all tie together into the overarching narrative. Horror games are always fun for me. I just like the idea of being scared. I like seeing some stuff that's kind of creepy, and I like these sort of fresher takes on older horror stories. When a developer mixes in something that happened in real life and also mixes in some popular myths, it just adds to all the enjoyment because you can point to it and say, oh, I know what they're doing. That's really cool. Or, oh, I remember this old horror story. There's just something about that I find really interesting. I know there are a lot of other horror games that are coming out. There are a lot of indie horror games because it's just a genre that gets used a lot. And I'm looking forward to seeing what gets made next year. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.